Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon. Great to see you all here. Thank you to my panelists, Hamza and Tareq, for being with us today. So today we're going to talk about what we're calling hybrid lives. And really, this is essentially about change. It's a fundamental change that I think is affecting the way we interact, conceive, and engage with spaces. If we've learned anything over the last 2 years, it's the irrelevance of single-use spaces. What we've learned during COVID and the last 2 years of the various lockdowns that we've endured is that you can do many things from one place. You can work, you can shop, you can eat and entertain, you can study, and you can work out pretty much from anywhere. And we're calling this hybrid lives, which poses the question, why would you go to an office if all you can do is work? And why do we need a hotel lobby if all you can do is check in? It's a fundamental shift that's really impacting the way we interact with spaces and the way we think about spaces, but also about our need for flexibility. I think as individuals, as humans now, we demand greater flexibility about what we do and where we do it and how we live our lives. In fact, a recent study from McKinsey found that 75% of respondents preferred a hybrid working model than one that involved working full-time on-site. And 59% of younger workers, those aged 18 to 34, would actually walk away from a job if a hybrid option was not made available. So we can see there is a massive fundamental shift taking place in the way we think about our lives and we interact and engage with different types of spaces. But what does this mean for hospitality? So today, we're Tareq. Unfortunately, Tim couldn't be here today, so Tareq very kindly is stepping in, Director of OBMI. Great to have you. And Hamza Khan, co-founder of Letswork. So very nice to have you both on the panel today.
Thank you.
Tareq, I want to start with you. I think that we've seen a big shift, even before COVID, in terms of spaces in the hospitality world, with the lifestyle brands, the proliferation of lifestyle, the way that they have created and conceived these more dimensionalized, multi-purpose spaces, lobby spaces where they're built for sort of living and working and playing, very much with socialization top of the agenda. But there's been even more of a shift since then. Are we looking at an almost deconstruction of the hotel industry as we know it today, or what's going on here?
You're absolutely right, Catherine. Hybrid and remote working is here to stay. There's an educated workforce that are absolutely not going to give up on this. You said it yourself on a recent survey, 50% of young workers said they would walk away from a job. And there's an understanding that we can no longer afford to stick to the rigid way of thinking we've been thinking for a very long time. We were discussing earlier hotels. The Baltimore Hotel was the first sort of modern hotel to have been built in modern times. We know hotels go back 5,000, 6,000 years. But the first modern hotel was built in Boston in 1820, was the Baltimore Hotel. If you look at the floor plan of that hotel, it's almost identical to the floor plan of the hotel we're sitting in today. Very large lobby, very large dining room, individual keys, and the design of hotels hasn't changed over the past 200 years. The services, the amenities may have improved, they've elevated a little, but that hasn't changed. We're in a time today where with this idea of hybrid work, we need to move away from this rigid way of thinking and rigid design and move into a design that's very fluid and hospitality offerings that are far more fluid. Unfortunately, hotels and operators are probably one of the last stakeholders in the market which are coming to realize this. Until today, every hotel has, for every square footage, there's one single use. And there's a realization now that for every square foot and every square meter we have in a hotel or a hospitality offering, we can have multifaceted uses. And that can begin to generate several streams, several revenue streams. So this is definitely a realization. And at OBMI, for example, we've spent the past 2 years working on 3 particular abstract ways of looking at the hotel. The first is this idea of a vertical resort. We're resort architects, but when you design resorts, you realize that they're very horizontal, and that leads to a lot of inefficiency in the way you use these spaces. So, in this world of hybrid and urbanization, we thought to ourselves, how can you take this horizontal resort experience and bring it into an urban setting? So we've worked on this vertical resort where what you do is you start to take clusters and different districts and stack them on top of each other. What's attractive about the resort is it's this layers of experience from the second you arrive until the second you leave. Every time you walk through a space, there's layers of experience. So why can urban resorts not look the same? So you've got the cultural district, the artistic district, the culinary district, and even the residential district in one tower. Another one is the idea of the transformable hotel room. Hotel rooms until today serve a very, very sort of rigid function. It's a place to sleep, wake up, get dressed in the morning, and leave. We don't want that anymore. People want to be able to live, work, and play in the same spaces, and they want to be able to travel the world and live, work, and play from wherever they are. So we're looking at, sort of combining hotel rooms with very innovative furniture, but at the same time, digitally immersive technology, where you can wake up and you can, whether it's you do your yoga or your workouts, or you might even want to pray in a spiritual environment. So this room transforms into a very spiritual environment. Midday, you can turn it into an office, and at night, you turn it into something that's far more intimate and very personal. And the last one, which you saw up there, that's the movable hotel. It's not glamping, which is just glorified camping. No, it's this idea of building modular, almost flat pack resorts. These can move around with you to anywhere in the world. So you could move these to a rim of a volcano, or the Serengeti, or somewhere on the beach in Bali, for example. It provides a very tailored personal experience, again, which you can live, work, and play in. And once you're done, it packs up, it moves, and it's as if it was never there. There's very minimal intervention. There's no restrictions for land usage. And this is one which we've just launched this year and is already in prototype with several scientists from NASA. So definitely, it's time to look again once more at what a hotel room is and what a hotel is, and move away from this fixed, rigid thinking towards a very fluid experience.
Right, and one of the things you just talked about was that word efficiency, right? And I think that's exactly, Hamza, what you're looking at with Letswork. You're looking at some of these traditional legacy spaces, like a hotel lobby, for example, and thinking, what else can we do with this space? And I think it's an interesting kind of combination of two trends, right? It's hospitality world waking up and saying, we have all this underutilized space, and it's the changing nature of how we're working, this work from anywhere trend. And those two colliding are giving you that perfect opportunity to create something really quite interesting.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, so with us, for those of you in the audience who aren't familiar with what Letswork is, so Letswork is a subscription service for people to find spaces to work from around them. So we're live in the UAE, and what we do is we partner with hotels, cafes, business centers, and co-working spaces across the country, and we basically connect them up with a single membership that allows people to then work from this network of spaces with a single passport. And we initially launched Letswork back in 2018, 2019, and we partnered up with the Rove Hotels in Dubai. And this was a this was a sort of a 3-star property in Dubai, and they were quite trendy for their sort of the price range that they were targeting at, and they had fully functional lobbies with plugs there. The Wi-Fi was fantastic, the coffee was great, and naturally people already started coming there to work quite organically, and we saw that as an opportunity and thought, how about, and since people love working from cafes as well, how about we can sort of create this tech infrastructure which allows people to then not only just casually work from there, but actually have some sort of a payment method for them to work from there, and they have a reserved seat there for themselves, and they can sort of connect with other people and like-minded individuals, and then they can also work from a network of spaces as well, not just that space.
Right, and that must be great news for hotel operators. That's an additional revenue stream. Are you finding now that they're coming to you, inquiring about your platform, or are you going to them, and how is that relationship forming?
Yeah, 3 years in, we now sort of see an equal amount of sort of inbound and outbound queries, where inbound is hotel operators, co-working spaces, or even cafes reaching out to us and looking at us as a way of marketing in their property, as a way of becoming not just a traditional hotel property, but also becoming a community hub where local residents, for example, can come in and spend the day working from there. They can dine at the F&B outlets. They can use the gym. They can maybe try out the spa as well. So that allows hotels, especially during the pandemic, it allowed them to not rely on tourists and foreign travel when it was closed.
Right. And I think that's such an important thing in hospitality, right, is thinking about that wider community. I think for so long we've seen hotels as these kind of towering, places in the middle of a city that are welcoming to the outsider, but very, very sort of closed to the local community. And it's great that with these more hybrid spaces, we're actually opening our eyes for once. We're looking outside the door and saying, what does the local culture need? What does the community need? And how can we meet that need? How are you building that into your designs, Tareq, at OBMI? How are you thinking about culture and the community and bringing purpose into the way you are reimagining spaces of the future?
For 85 years, we've been very strong believers in the fact that culture is what creates destinations. It's very important to us when we're designing properties that the very first thing we tell is tell the story of this destination, tell the story of the context. Every place on earth was put there for a reason, and it's been influenced by the climate, by the people, by the food. Every destination around the world has been influenced by these external factors. And to us, especially post-pandemic, but we've been saying this for 8 decades now, is when people travel, they want to experience a destination that they can't experience anywhere else.
Yeah.
It sounds very generic, and a lot of people say it, but in all truthfulness, many of the big box brands, if you wake up in a hotel belonging to whatever brand in Singapore, and then you wake up in Zurich in the same hotel brand, you really wouldn't notice the difference. It's a very similar experience. To us, a brand is about setting the standards, but the experience has to 100% be driven by the context and the people and just the, whether it's the local vernacularisms or the culinary destination or whatever it is that makes this place unique and something worth visiting, that has to transcend into the hotel experience.
Yeah.
We call ourselves architects of storied places simply because we believe that every destination, every hotel has to tell a story, and that story has to be very true to and authentic to the place where it is.
And that's so important, right? But when you're looking at existing spaces, and I know that some of your work also, like Hamza, is looking at existing hotels and helping clients maybe sort of reimagine underused spaces, be those ballrooms or meeting rooms or other. What's the process if you're looking at a big, underutilized ballroom? How do you work with that client to sort of think about how they can better use that space? How can they monetize that space in perhaps ways that aren't being done today?
Absolutely. If you look at when we're designing hotels and building and constructing them, the amount of money and thought that goes into designing spaces such as the ballrooms and the all-day dining rooms, which really they get used for about 10 to 15% of the day, 20% if you're lucky. The other 80%, there's a guy walking around vacuuming the place. And yet, it's the biggest real estate within a property, and it's what a lot of money goes into. So we've been looking a lot recently at looking at these large ballrooms and all-day dinings. How can we utilize these, and how can we activate these spaces throughout the day? There's a brand we work with called Sublimotion. They have a restaurant experience in Ibiza, and they recently just opened one in Jumeirah in the Mandarin Oriental in Dubai. You step into this space, and it's entirely built up with sort of digital immersive technology. Once you're in the space, it can transform 360 degrees. So it can go from being a dining room to an underwater experience, to a pop-up culinary experience, to a theatrical performance, and even a retail experience. And so we're very strong believers in the fact that these large spaces, if we're putting this much time into building something that's only going to be used for about 2, 3, 4, 5 hours a day, something is fundamentally wrong with that process. So it's really understanding how we can use these spaces for many different functions and activating them throughout the day. And using technology, and technology is really the key driver to that.
Yeah. And what about the challenges in creating hybrid spaces? I think that it's very easy to say, okay, we have a hotel lobby, let's add some co-working desks, or let's add a cafe, and you're done. You tick the box, you've made a hybrid space. But I don't think it's that easy, right? What are some of those things that you need to think about, those factors that you need to consider as you work with your clients and your operators to convert a single-use space into a multi-purpose space? And what challenges do you have to overcome, perhaps, with them?
No, I mean, we've seen some challenges in some properties, for example, where we initially thought it might be a great idea, but unfortunately, it didn't really make sense in the end when it was actually being used for co-working, where the hotel was essentially meant to be for the hotel guests to sort of check in, relax with their luggage, and get before they where they could move up to their rooms, or maybe wait before they actually head out for the day. But then that sort of clashed with our users, for example, coming in and working from the lobbies or using the business centers, and sort of if there was way too many people that were turning up at the check-in and way too many people coming up to work, there was a sort of clash of functions. So I think it really needs to be done in a smart way, where at the end of the day the hotel was made for the purpose for the guests, and so making sure that there isn't any clash that happens between the two uses. I think that's something that we sort of actively take part in, and now we become a lot more sort of careful in the types of properties that we partner with.
Yeah, and I know, Tareq, we were talking earlier about lifestyle hotels as well, and the fact that you were pointing out that even some of these sort of so-called sort of multi-dimensional lobby spaces actually they look great, but they don't actually work.
Yeah, so there's two prongs to it. The first prong, which Hamza mentioned, is it's adapting your furniture and the experience, so you can plug and play wherever you are. Anywhere in the lobby, you can pull up your work, plug and play. If you have a good Wi-Fi connection, you can work from anywhere in the world. But the other side to it is sometimes being overly ambitious, and I think that's what we've seen a lot with some of these absolutely beautiful lifestyle hotels, but they can be overly ambitious. Acoustics, for example, is an issue. So you have these long timber benches which can take 12 people, and it's a great experience and aesthetically very pleasing. But if you've tried to work around the bench where you've got 10 other people all from different places trying to hold their Zoom calls or trying to work together in small mini meetings, it can be very distracting. And so the key to this is, one, not to be overambitious, but the second key will be making sure that we're not tainting the hotel experience by forcing a business experience to it. So that's very important. I think I mentioned this story. I was in Zanzibar a few weeks ago working a site with a client, and I stayed at one of the very excellent resort there, the Melia, I think it was. And I was there one morning, and I asked, I wanted to work in the lobby, and they set me up. And then a couple, it was around 7 a.m. or 8 a.m., and a couple had just arrived, and they looked very young, and they almost looked like honeymooners. And I'm sure they were. They walked up the steps, and the first thing they saw were these beautiful long beaches and crystal seas and blue skies. And then they slowly sort of adjusted their eyesight. There was me sat there with a laptop in my lap, big headphones, trying to have a collections call with my team. And I thought to myself, yeah, this isn't right. I've tainted that experience. They're here for this very intimate, personal experience. Business is the last thing they want to be experiencing. And yet there I was with my suit on, with a laptop and huge headphones. And I thought to myself, that's what we mean by saying we don't want to be overambitious, that we're tainting the experience. So it's about being able to provide very intimate spaces for people to work without hindering the overall hospitality experience.
And you raise an important point there, I think, which is resorts. So I think for so long we thought about hybrid lives and hybrid spaces in terms of the urban context, in terms of city hotels or city spaces. But actually, with the work from anywhere trend, we're seeing that shift to resort and leisure destinations. Places like, as you say, that people probably presume are just for holidays, for leisure. And yet there are people like you going there and having your Zoom call, in Absolutely. The same vicinity.
I mean, people don't want to be stuck in an urban context. This idea of live, work, and play. Airbnb, for example, they've just permitted, is it that their workforce can work in any of 170 countries around the world for 6 months a year. So people want to be able to experience different, resort settings. Up until today, if you look at an operator brand guidelines or standards, the business center is the very last thing in the operator ABCs. It's a checklist, and even as designers, we're guilty of it. The business center in a resort is an afterthought. Yeah. So once we've finished the entire master planning, space planning, the guest experience, you go down the checklist, and the very last thing is business center. And business center is an HP desk jet and an 8-person table and a water cooler. And we'll go back and we'll figure out where can we squeeze the business center so it's out of the way and unused. Because up until now, business centers were a place to print your boarding pass or print a PCR test today. It's very different today. People want to be able to experience the resort setting with business as well. So we're rethinking this idea of a business center isn't for dark mahogany walls and that's it. No, we need to be able to redesign business centers so that they too can experience this resort feel and this outside, understand, be one with nature and one with the destination and working at the same time. So we've been working very closely with several brands in terms of reimagining what a business center should look like in a resort context.
But should we even be calling it a business center in these
Yeah.
days?
No.
I mean, I'm going to challenge you there. Like, it feels like an archaic
agree.
word from the past. So
Absolutely,
we don't, yeah.
it is absolutely right. Yeah,
Especially with this whole trend of digital nomadism, right?
Yeah.
It's people have that they're completely untethered now.
Right.
They're not necessarily linked to their office anymore. Companies like Airbnb, for example, and not just from an internal perspective with their operations, where they're allowing their employees to work from anywhere. From other countries, up to how many months per year, but also now Airbnbs. There's now tick boxes as well in the filter section where you can say, okay, I want a property with tried and tested Wi-Fi. So on the Airbnb app, you can actually see what the Wi-Fi speed is at any property that you're planning on staying at. So all these different things, again, it all comes down to this whole remote working revolution that we've seen over the last 2 years, where the lines between work and your work, it's no longer work-life balance.
No,
right? It's a conversion of the two. And on top of that, I mean, with what you mentioned, Tareq, about forcing a separate sort of business proposition for existing properties. We're now starting to see hotel operators just using co-working as a main revenue stream for themselves as well. So we're speaking to Selina, for example, which is an Israeli hospitality company based in London. They have 150 properties across the globe in 30 different countries, and what they're doing now is that they're really picking up on this whole millennial Gen Z sort of trend of being able to work from anywhere. And what's interesting is that, I mean, the properties aren't anything spectacular. They're not sort of 5-star luxury properties. They're pretty standard, but they're just trendy. But what really drives their attraction is the fact that they have not only really cool people staying at the properties, but also really cool people from the neighboring areas actually working from the properties, and you as a user, like you rightly said about a hotel in Singapore is looking the same as a hotel in Zurich. What actually differentiates between the two are the people there,
is the
community, and then you can actually interact with local people, and that's how you really experience a destination in its truest form.
Yeah. I think community is absolutely critical here to hybrid spaces, and
Definitely.
It really makes a huge difference. It's not simply about working in a lobby or having a space with multiple purposes. It's about actually creating a space that different types of people brings them together, and they form a common bond, and it becomes attractive because of that community as much as it does because of the actual space itself.
Exactly. I think what's interesting as well is the different types of people that could be using these spaces as well, because we as a business, for example, we started off targeting our product offering to your freelancers and your digital nomads and your startups. But now with remote working, what's happened is that you have large corporations which are now going fully remote, or they're employing a hybrid solution where you come into the office 2 or 3 days a week, and then you can work from home / work from anywhere the other 2 or 3 days of the week. And then what's happening now is large companies are now sponsoring or subsidizing a Letswork membership or whatever membership to allow their employees to work from these spaces. So on the days that they're working from home, they're not actually sort of in their pajamas in their bed with their camera turned off. They're actually in public spaces as well. They're working alongside colleagues as well. They're not commuting an hour long drive to the office, and at the same time they're working alongside some really interesting people who may actually be a client of theirs in the future, and it's just great sort of networking opportunity for them as well.
There's not just the realm of entrepreneurs anymore or startup people, it's
Definitely.
actually the cross-sector of industry and business and professionals. Yeah, that's really interesting. And do you see a trend perhaps in the future, Tareq, in terms of resort design, where this work from anywhere trend really is built into the conceptualization process, where it's not just like, let's find somewhere where people can work, but actually really completely reimagining that space. So it's it brings work and play together in a way that doesn't clash, but still feels fluid. It doesn't feel like you work over there and you play over there, which I think is what we can't do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think anytime we're working with brands or developers, like any brand, we do this exercise of personas, understanding who our target market is for this. And we've already seen the shift where the worker or the digital nomad, as Hamza called them, is now one of those personas. So how can we begin to accommodate a space for them? Raffles in Singapore recently just opened another line of business, I guess, which is they actually now rent out keys for a day use to be used as an office.
We did that as well. We did that in Dubai as well.
So we know day use hotels, but day use office in a room. Now I think there's going to be a sort of it'll take time to be comfortable with that, because if when Hamza and I met earlier, if I had called Hamza up and said, meet me in room 120 in my bedroom, yeah, it could have been a little strange at first, but that's the direction we're moving in.
Yeah. That's really interesting you bring that up, because that's exactly what we did in the pandemic. So when hotel occupancy sunk to your single digits or your 10-20%, we sat down with some of our partner properties in Dubai, and we said, guys, there's people who are stuck at home who don't want to be working from home because they have all sorts of distractions from their partners, their kids, their pets, whatever it is, or they just don't have good Wi-Fi, or they don't want to work on their dining table. And then you have all this empty sort of inventory available. How about we get rid of the beds, put in some desks in there, and then rent them out for the day? And that was hugely successful, to the point where it still sells today. So we still have, whenever we've given the properties access to a PMS, which they can then sort of switch on, switch off, and play around with timing accordingly to whatever their occupancy is. In the summer, or Ramadan, for example, here in the UAE, or in Saudi, where people, when hotels start seeing a small dip in occupancy, they can sort of turn on the inventory back on and play around with what the rate would be. And again, it's just diversifying the revenue streams, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
But how big of a mental shift is this for traditional operators? I mean, it must be really hard for them to get. They're really shifting out of their comfort zone. They're not just selling room nights. They're selling something completely different now, and they've really got to be very fluid and flexible about how they do that. Have you noticed, is it been a hard shift, or are some still quite resistant? Or?
Well, I mean, all the top brands are doing. I mean, we did it with Emaar Hospitality in the UAE, but we also did it with Aloft. So that's the Marriott group, and they had a separate work from anywhere sort of page where they had a lot of their properties listed for that. Accor, for example, is very actively, especially in Europe, doing Wojo, which is where they're basically taking their existing business center brands and then refurbishing them to actually become really cool and interesting co-working spaces, which people would actually want to work from, as opposed to printing out your PCR test or your flight tickets. So no, I think, and again, I think it's also a generational shift, right? I think as you see a new generation of hotel managers, of hotel operators come in who've sort of grown up around seeing all this stuff, I think that's when the mind shift sort of starts trickling down. And then when you start looking at sort of your again, coming back to the Gen Z and millennial travelers and their huge disposable income and their disregard for saving, for example, and wanting to really have fantastic experiences, I think it's a massive opportunity for hotels to make the most of.
And we'd be remiss, I think, not to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the Metaverse, which I know was on the main stage as we're talking. Tareq, you mentioned a lot about, just before, about the use of technology and immersive experiences and digital projection, presumably, and how that helps to create transformable spaces. But when we think to the future, and even really almost now, we're seeing the Metaverse. A lot of people are talking about the Metaverse, about its impact on hospitality. How do you see that impacting the future of design and the way that we interact with spaces, and the way that, it's almost another vision of hybrid, because hybrid could be one thing, it could be a multi-purpose tangible space, or it could be a tangible space that combines with something in the virtual world as well that can obviously change.
And use the right word there, you said combined with. There's a common misconception that this is binary. The Metaverse will be binary, will be living in reality or will be living in virtual reality. It'll be an on and off button. No, the Metaverse, as far as it relates to hospitality, it will be an extension to hospitality as it is today. So in terms of how is the Metaverse shaping the way we design versus how is the way we design being influenced by the Metaverse? The struggle will be when people travel, when people are going to experience something different, it's because they not only want to experience the hotel, but they want the outside influences. There's it's the fourth and the fifth and the sixth sense. It's the taste, it's the sense, it's the noises, the vibe, the electricity, something that's very intangible in that sense. So how we can begin to design in the Metaverse offerings which are so sort of immersive that there's no longer that feel that you're missing some of these senses and you're very immersed in this experience. But in terms of how the Metaverse will influence the design of hotels, for example, it should. I mean, we still have hotels popping up all over the world, Riyadh and Saudi and everywhere, all over the world, where very little thought is being given to the Metaverse at the moment. But as we start to look at the Metaverse being an extension to the reality we live in today. So why are rooms not being designed today in a way that they can transform digitally and immersively throughout the day? As I said, they can move from a spiritual experience to a sporty experience, to a very intimate and personal experience. So this is the way, as designers, we need to be looking at these spaces now. We're designing rooms which need to survive 20, 30, 40 years. 2 years from now, the metaverse will be in a very different place where it is.
Yeah.
So we need to be designing with that in mind. And again, it comes down to the use of technology, and technology is no longer functional. Up until the function and about the managing your electrical systems, for example. No, it's going to be part of the experience. So we need to be designing with that in mind from today.
Hamza, what about in terms of your world? Do you see technology, the metaverse, how do you see that impacting the future of work and the kind of spaces that you're looking at?
Definitely. I think at the moment we're only really scratching the surface of full potential Metaverse can really offer us. As a business, for example, we've played around for the last few months with ideas of what we can do to integrate that, and to have that sort of Web3 layer into our business and into the app, for example. So at the moment, when you use the Letswork app, you open it up on your phone. Once you've bought a membership, you can then scroll through the different spaces that you can work from. You arrive at the space and you press check-in. What could be really cool, for example, would be before you actually get to the space, before you actually check in, you can actually open it up and see who's there right now. Right. So you can see avatars of people who are working from there. You can actually see a proper layout or a floor plan of the space, and actually experience. And really, instead of just seeing a very sort of two-dimensional floor plan of these are all the spots available where you can work from in the hotel's business center, the lobby, or the co-working space. But you can actually see, okay, no, that's a really cool space, and I can see the person who's working on the table next to it works at XYZ, and that's someone I'd love to network with. So I think there's a lot of potential that's there, but I think it requires a lot of sort of, again, like Tareq said, I think it definitely will be used to complement the real world as opposed to replace it.
Let's
I hope.
So. Great, thank you so much. Are there any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I just want to take the opportunity to thank Hamza and Tareq very much for their time today, and for all of you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.